Now, oftentimes, when we are sharing perspectives and memories about the former president, J.J Rawlings, we hear from the elderly and the middle-aged. But let's hear now from the youth, the future leaders. What do they know about the late former president, Flight Lieutenant J.J Rawlings, before and after his death? We have some young politicians for this discussion joining us via Zoom. We have Ira Adams KARIM, she's a former student leader, Benjamin Alpha Edu, communications professional, Abdul Rahim Na, member of the Political Campaign Archives and the GIJ, and KABU NARTEY, political communications strategist and author of A President in Exile. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Arma.
Thank you, Arma, for having us.
All right, okay.
Thank you, Arma.
Thank you for joining us. Now, as I said before, oftentimes when we're talking about former President Rawlings and we're sharing perspectives and memories, you usually hear from elderly persons. You heard from Obeda Samwa, you heard from former Trade Minister Emma Mitchell, you heard from, former Tourism Minister A.C. Sutherland Addy. But we never hear from the youth, and justifiably so. I mean, I'm sure many of you were not born at the time that he had started ruling this country. So, first of all, what were some of the things, all of you can go around this question, each of you can take the question. What were some of the things you heard about Mr. Rawlings growing up? Let's start with KARIM.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon to lovely viewers all over Ghana. And I want to take this opportunity as well to express my deepest condolences to the family of the former president. Well, for me as a young man growing up, I heard a lot of positive stuff about the former president. First and foremost being the fact that he was a disciplinarian, someone who was principled and wanted the right thing done, and someone who was equally passionate about his country and passionate about the continent, and wanted to see Ghana progress, wanted to see Africa progress. So as a young man, these were some of the things that I heard about Rawlings. And fortunately for me, my father happened to have worked, with him during the PNDC era, up until when the NDC as a party started as well. And so most of these stories about Rawlings I heard from my father growing up as a young man. And for me, that is when I, started developing that much love for him as a person.
I see. Let's turn to you, KABU NARTEY. What about you? What are your memories? What do you remember about Rawlings growing up?
A big condolence to the bereaved family. And however, I also had some not a little to say about the former president and then how he came into contact with my father and family. My home spoke quite critical of the former leader, also because my father was a victim, the Kalabule victim of the coup. And so I had quite discouraging stuff. But having searched history and also embarked on this writing project, I got to find out some aspects of him which I really enjoyed as a revolutionary leader, one who wanted to purge a system which was fraught with corruption. But it doesn't take away how controversial, the comment I was hearing of him. Also because many say that he lost control over an exercise that he said it was for a good cause. And many people were taking advantage of the process to settle scores with individuals they had issues with. So my home was quite critical, but I stated in my article, just to prelude the publishing of the book, that he was exonerated because of the many interesting revelations I came across.
Benjamin Alpha, now, I mean, a lot of people know him as Dr. Boom because every time he opens his mouth to speak, something controversial comes out. What are your own memories growing up? What do you remember growing up about Mr. Rawlings?
Thank you, good afternoon to the other brilliant colleagues on the line. First of all, I received the news with a lot of dissonance. I mean, I couldn't believe it because I thought it was one of those usual hoax and fake news that people pass around. And then later in the day, I saw that most of the online portals and the major portals were reporting it, and I had to come to terms with it. But my dissonance and disbelief stemmed from the fact that growing up, Rawlings had always been a present character in the life of Ghanaian politics. And I remember very well growing up as a young boy in Dabuase, a town close to Takrady. Whether it was, I think it was a political rally or a commissioning, Rawlings came around with a helicopter. That was the first time I was seeing a helicopter, so the memory never goes away. And you could see the charisma and the enigma around the man at the time, and the way the whole town was taken over by military and all of that. So growing up, I always saw him on television. I always saw him to be the president. He was an invincible character to me, somebody that thinking as a kid could never die or could never pass away. So it was a shock to me. I dreaded this day. I never wanted it to happen.
Right.
Because it has been a very big part of my upbringing as a young boy, and it was a difficult news to receive. And I'm not surprised that the whole nation and indeed the entire globe is in such a state of mourning and reflecting on his legacy and his impact.
Okay. Let me come to you, Abdul Rahim. Now, I'm sure that you share the sentiments that your colleagues are also saying, but I want to know from you what lessons you've picked from him as a politician. I mean, he encouraged volunteerism, but for you personally, what are some of the principles that you've picked from him as a politician?
Growing up, for me personally, I think that the greatest of lessons I learned from J.J Rawlings were all from my dad. My dad actually loved him so much, and I remember in the early 2000s when J.J Rawlings came to Madina Zungu for Zungu Junction for a rally for the National Democratic Congress. My dad made sure that he carried me on his neck so I could see J.J Rawlings. So ever since, I'm not sure I've ever had a personal interaction with the man until now that he's gone. And so for me, the lessons I learned from J.J Rawlings is that for me that young people can take up the shaping of their country if they really want to. And this was a young force who had just noticed that there were things that were wrong with the nation, and in his own perspective, he had to correct them. In less than 4 months, in what he called house cleaning exercise, he made sure that he put the nation in a path he thought was good, and then gave it back to a democratic group. And then a few years down the line, he comes back again and takes it up. This time around, he lasts for 19 years, 4 months. And so for me, the greatest lesson I learned from this is that no matter where we're born, no matter who we are, we have to take active participation in the development of our country, and make sure that whatever decision that is taken, if we think that is not in the best interest of the young people and the future of our country, we speak about it and take action against it.
Right. KARIM, let me come back to you. Now, one thing a lot of people who work with him say is that he never shied away from hard work and volunteerism. And we saw videos of him, going into gutters, cleaning gutters with, the people whose mandate it was to be cleaning the gutters. We're not seeing that in the young people of today. What do you think the problem is?
Well, I think that I always say that leadership is about service. It's not just about occupying an office and wearing a suit and a tie and driving in a Land Cruiser every day, but it's about seeing to the fact that the daily, challenges that the people face are being solved, and that can only be done when the leader takes initiative himself. One of the challenges that I have found with a lot of young people today who seek to get into leadership or who are serving in various leadership capacities is that they do not seek to get into these places to serve the people, but then to serve themselves. They look at all the goodies that, the various leadership opportunities present to them. So if he wants to become a member of parliament or he wants to become a minister of state today, it's about what he's going to get as a member of parliament, what benefits he's going to get as a minister of state, and not what impact he's going to make in the lives of the people. And for me, that is what I see. That self-seeking attitude, that selfishness among lots of young people today, and not that zeal, that willingness to first of all take the first step and demonstrate to the people how things are supposed to be done in order to get them to do it.
Okay, leadership by example. Very well. Let's talk about his legacy. KABU NARTEY, you're still with me. What do you think Rawlings' legacy will be?
Rawlings' legacy will be to get the youth to be responsible and responsive to their society and economy. If you read his story, very touching, this was a young soldier in the army who felt that a lot of corruption issues were happening. People could not get food commodity to feed on. Perhaps the elites were the ones doing well in a rather bourgeoisie, society. And so he said that we need to stand up. Rawlings stood up for the poor. Now that was being responsive to his time. He didn't complain. He demonstrated it. However radical or controversial is another day, but that is a legacy that Rawlings stood for. He was also responsive in the sense that when he realized that he was going out of leadership or he was getting perhaps power drunk, he said, you know what, let me embrace, civilian government. And that is what the youth must learn from this very legacy that Rawlings, left us behind. Of course, there are many policies you touch on from the Constitution, economic recovery programs, very tangible in our economy. But for me, the very thing that immortalizes him in the minds and hearts of the young Ghanaian is that we've got to be responsive to our times. Stand up when we have to stand up, and then allow for, tempest to come when you have to do. And perhaps we have to see the next J.J. Rawlings, perhaps after the next Kwame Nkrumah of our time.
All right. And Benjamin Alpha, what about you? What do you think his legacy will be? What will it take to have people, exhibiting those traits that former President Rawlings had?
But I very much share in the sentiment of my colleagues about the fact that Rawlings epitomizes the need for young people to stand up and make a change. I mean, this was what, in 79, he was what, a 32-year-old army officer who identified a critical need to step up and rescue the country, as it were, from the issues of corruption and all of that. I mean, we know of the excesses of that whole action, and we know that times are not the same. I mean, times are not the same, but the value we pick from that is the value of courage, the ability to stand up to the plate when it matters. And for me, that is a very instructive thing. I think that kind of courage is missing in the young people of today. We are so fixated with our own progress without seeing that our progress is tied into the general progress of the society. So that's one. Number two, I think one of the very phenomenal things that Rawlings did, that as a young military officer who was, barely schooled, I think after Achimota, I do not know of his next educational qualification. He was able to bring together a very good team of academics, of technocrats. I mean, you could talk about the likes of Dr. Beda Samoa, Professor Kwesi Bote, and all of that. You could see the vision and the intelligence there, even though he was not schooled. And for me, that is a mark of somebody who is very visionary, somebody who likes teamwork and all of that. And finally, I think one thing that we can all learn from the Rawlings legacy is that he was fighting for an egalitarian society. He wanted both the poor and the rich, a class divide to be bridged. And we could talk about the excesses of all the measures he took, but the values in there is that as government, as young people, as a society, we must push to make sure that the poor, the downtrodden in society.
He definitely fought for a just society. Brilliant perspectives there from the young people. Those were Adams KARIM, former student leader, Benjamin Alpha Edu, communications professional, Abdul Rahim Na, member of Political Campaign Archives, JIJ, and KABU NARTEY, political communication strategist and author of A President in Exile. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen.